It's been a long time since Intel pushed anything innovative in the CPU market. I mean, they've been on the 14 nanometer process node since 2014. This has allowed AMD to simply run away with retail sales, market share, and now even the gaming crown. Intel needed to do something. Well, that something has finally arrived, and I, for one, am pretty excited about it. Intel recently had their Keynote Innovation event on October 27th regarding stuff like AI, quantum computing, and cloud-based performance. The only interesting thing to me out of that entire event, and I'm sure most of you are interested in it as well, is Intel's new CPU lineup that they just introduced. This will be their 12th generation desktop processor codenamed AlderLake. Or AlderLake? I don't know. Now, I just want to talk about a few things today with the upcoming CPU launch, which is on November 4th. But actually, the CPU pre-orders are already live over on Newegg, so if you want to check them out down in the description, I'll leave links for them below. Let's talk about the very first thing, which is the processors. That's what Intel is creating themselves and coming out with, and that's what's such a big deal. If you've followed Intel or had Intel in the past, you would know that since 2014, Intel hasn't really come out with anything innovative when it comes to the CPU space. They've just been riding that 14 nanometer process node, and for the longest time, their high-end or top-of-the-line processors had 4 cores and 8 threads. That was it. That's all they offered. AMD came out with their Ryzen processors around the same time, and they've built traction steadily over the past couple years. Now, AMD is on top with everything, from the most cores and threads, to the highest gaming performance, to the best workstation performance also. In fact, I'm running AMD in my own rig right now. So what does that tell you? Intel's processors are marketed now for this revolutionary performance in gaming and multitasking. The processor is a hybrid design. What that means is it's got a combination of performance cores and efficiency cores, or big and little cores. The performance cores are obviously built for performance across the single and lightly threaded workloads. These processor cores are multi-threaded. So if you've got an 8-core processor, it will have hyper-threading and have 16 threads. So you've got 8 and 16 just like a traditional processor. The efficiency cores are not hyper-threaded, and they are just single-core performance. This is the 12900K, which is their flagship part. So you've got 16 cores because you've got 8 performance and 8 efficiency, and then you have 24 threads because only the performance cores are the hyper-threaded part. So you have 16 cores and 24 threads. And with the 12700K, the i7 variant, you've got 12 cores and 20 threads. Or for the i5, you've got 10 cores and 16 threads. It is pretty complicated if you ask me. Now, Intel just released 3 different processors. Well, technically they've introduced 6 processors because they have the F variants of those processors. You've got the 12900K and KF, you've got the 12700K and KF, and then you've got the 12600K and KF. The F series processor is just the same thing without integrated graphics. So if you don't need the built-in graphics and you plan on running a dedicated GPU like an RTX 3060 or 3070, you can spring for the F series variant and save yourself a little bit of money. Another thing that Intel is toting for this release is their thread director. It prioritizes and manages workloads, sending tasks to the best core for the job. This is a piece of hardware built into the CPU that will work alongside Windows operating scheduler built into their OS, and they will decide what cores can get what tasks. Neat experience, but I'm curious to see how it's actually going to work. Now, Intel has said that it's going to be releasing 60 new SKUs for these processors. I'm pretty sure that's between mobile variants and OEM board partners and stuff like that, but the only ones they've released so far are those 3 processors or 6 processors I just named. And if you actually go over here on Newegg's website, you can see they have all 4 of them listed. The 12900K, the i9 variant, has already sold out. Not that I could afford it anyway, but if you were looking for it, sorry, the pre-orders are already gone. The ones that I can see as of this filming are the i7 variant in the K series, the i5 variant in the K series, the 12600K. Now they do have the 12900KF still left, but they're probably going to sell out in no time too. And you can see your prices here. Now, Intel has tons of new features they're bringing to the table with these processors, such as PCIe 5.0 and DDR5. But you can't do any of those things without the proper motherboard. Intel's older generation motherboards, such as their Z490 or Z590, will not work with AlderLake CPUs. The CPU socket is actually bigger than previous generations. This is LGA 1700. It's an entirely new chipset. So a new motherboard is a must, no matter what. The last part of the motherboards that you need to take into account is these motherboards can handle DDR4 or DDR5 because the CPUs, the 12th gen CPU, is compatible with both. Now, the motherboards are not. So when you're shopping for a motherboard, you need to make sure that it's going to be able to handle what RAM you decide to put in it. You can see this Gigabyte right here, this Z690i. It says ITX motherboard with DDR4. So this motherboard can only handle DDR4 RAM. If you have DDR5 RAM, if you decide to spring and buy the new stuff, this motherboard won't work for you. So when you're shopping, pay attention to that. I'll leave a couple links below to motherboards, and I'll list DDR4 RAM motherboards and DDR5 RAM motherboards just to make it easy on you. The first thing I can tell you with DDR5 is it is very expensive. You can see right here on Newegg's website, the Corsair Dominator Platinum, this is 32 gigs, two 16 gig sticks, is $329 for 2 sticks of RAM. Now it's running at 5200 megahertz, which is ridiculously fast compared to DDR4, of course. Now you can also get a Corsair RAM kit for DDR4 for $159. You're talking about almost double the price for the same size storage by making the jump to DDR5. So that's another thing to keep into account is, do I want to pay the premium to get DDR5 to get that increased RAM speed? Even though your speeds are higher, your CAS latency timings are higher, which isn't good. But these are all just early adopter problems. If you want to get on the platform, these are things you have to deal with. CPU cooling is one of these such problems. The bad news about these new Intel processors is none of them come with CPU coolers. All 6 of these CPUs that just came out, not one of them has a cooler built in with it. You have to buy your own cooler. The good news is a lot of your old liquid coolers and big air coolers will work with LGA 1700. You just need an adapter kit from the manufacturer. A few companies like MSI I've found already have coolers out on the market. You can see right here, MSI MEG liquid cooler. It's kind of weird looking. I've never seen something like it before. I'm curious to see how it's going to perform, but $279 for a liquid cooler is very expensive. That is on the high end for a liquid cooler. Now this one's a little cheaper. This one's only $89, but how well is it going to perform? I can't tell you. So be hesitant when you're purchasing this. Make sure you watch reviews on these things. Maybe I'll pick one up and give it a shot. But these ones, if you click into it, are already, you can see it says LGA 1700 ready. So that means they've included the brackets for this thing right out of the box and you're ready to go. However, you can see some of these other ones like this Corsair Hydro series is $139, which is a really good price by the way, but it says for LGA 1700 mounting bracket, contact manufacturer for support. That's because you have to go over on Corsair's website, find this retrofit kit to make it work with your CPU cooler that you've already purchased for your previous generation Intel CPU. Now, there's a couple companies that have stepped up and said they're going to give free replacement kits to anybody that's purchased one of these CPU coolers. The only 2 that I've seen so far are Arctic and Noctua. So if you have one of those coolers, go ahead and email them or contact them. They should have a link on their website, and you can see about getting one of these free kits for your Intel cooler. Finally, I just wanted to summarize everything together. If you skip to the end of the video, this is really just a recap of everything I talked about. If you're looking to upgrade to AlderLake, the things that you'll need at a minimum are going to be a motherboard, the CPU itself, and the cooler upgrade kit if you have like an air cooler or a liquid cooler for your old Intel chips. If you want to be an early adopter, you have to decide if you're going to be going with DDR4 or DDR5, because when you buy your CPU, that's not the only thing you have to worry about. You got to buy that motherboard, which is either a DDR4 or DDR5 motherboard. You can't buy both. I guess you could, but then you're swapping motherboards, which is silly. But that's going to affect your motherboard choice, and the motherboards are not cheap. If you go in here, you're talking anywhere from $200 all the way up to $500 or $600 for a high-end Z690 motherboard. I recommend to you, do not spend more on the motherboard than you spent on your CPU. That's just crazy. The last thing to keep in mind is your power supply might not even be powerful enough to run the CPU upgrade. According to WCCF Tech, they did an article on it the other day. The 12900K overclocked consumes up to 400 watts of power. you're talking 400 watts of power on the CPU, and if you have a RTX 3080, 3080 Ti, or 3090, some of those can consume anywhere between 300 to 400 watts of power by itself. That's maxing out an 800 to 850 watt power supply. So you would almost need a 1,000 watt or greater power supply to be able to run the high-end stuff. Oh, don't forget about the cost on this whole thing. I marked all these things down here. The 12900K is $650. Then you've got a comparable motherboard anywhere from $400 to $600. You've got DDR5 at least 32 gigs, because why would you put 16 gigs with all that high-end hardware? That's $300. Then you're talking about liquid cooling your CPU, because why would you not? That's another $130 to $200. You're talking about $1,600 just to upgrade your computer. That's not including storage, a case, a power supply, or the ever infamous graphics card. To me, that's way over the top. So I'm going to stick with the low-end things, or the mid-range as I like to say. Oh, and if you're interested in stuff like that, subscribe down below, hit that like button so you'll be notified when the next video goes live, because I plan on doing plenty of things with AlderLake whenever I can get my hands on these things. And let me know what you think. Are you excited about AlderLake? Are you an Intel fan? Do you want to see the competition heat up between Intel and AMD? Because frankly, it's kind of been dead lately. And even I have not been excited about tech, so I can only imagine how you've been. But that's it for now. And as I always say, I'm Danny with Danny's Tech Channel, and I'll see you in the next video.